For almost 30 years, Charles Spencer kept his silence. No interviews, no memoirs, no public words about the family that shattered in front of the entire world. Then a documentary proposal arrived, one connected to Netflix, to Prince Harry, and to Meghan Markle. It asked for the one thing he had never given away, the private Diana he alone still protected. His answer was a simple, flat refusal. In a man defined by quiet restraint, that single no echoed louder than any speech ever could. Now royal watchers are turning it over, wondering whether this moment has quietly rewritten the entire Sussex narrative. To understand why that refusal carries such weight, you have to understand the man who delivered it. Charles Spencer stood before the world in Westminster Abbey on that solemn day in September 1997. With an estimated 2 billion viewers bearing witness, the 9th Earl Spencer delivered words heavy with both grief and resolve. He spoke directly of raising Diana's sons with the warmth and imagination their mother embodied, shielding them from the very institutional forces that had so profoundly wounded her. The promise extended to her blood family's unwavering commitment to stand as guardians against the machinery that had crushed her spirit. Delivered in the presence of the Queen, Prince Philip, and the future king, these vows carried the gravity of public accountability. They were not lightly spoken, nor have they been forgotten. That single address etched itself into collective memory as a defining moment of familial duty, its echo resonating across decades whenever questions of protection and legacy arise. For those who have lived through the long aftermath, it remains a touchstone of what was solemnly undertaken in the face of unimaginable loss. Following that public moment, Charles Spencer chose a path of deliberate invisibility that spanned nearly 30 years. He refrained from interviews, declined to pen memoirs, and offered no commentary on the nephew he held dear or the evolving family dynamics that played out so visibly. This was no mere retreat, but a conscious decision to safeguard what remained private in the wake of relentless public scrutiny. In a world that commodified his sister's image endlessly, he granted no access to originals, licensed no grounds, and revealed no intimate details. Such restraint reflects a mature understanding of boundaries forged through experience. The absence itself became a form of statement, underscoring that true guardianship often requires stepping away from the spotlight rather than courting it. For observers of a certain age who have witnessed the relentless churn of media cycles, this steadfast privacy commands respect as an act of quiet integrity. The sequence began with what appeared, on the surface, to be a graceful and heartfelt gesture during the evening reception following the royal wedding in 2018. Meghan Markle wore Diana's distinctive aquamarine ring, its pale blue stone immediately recognizable to anyone who had followed the late princess's public life with any degree of attention. From the vantage point of Charles Spencer, who stood witness to the occasion, it likely registered as a touching acknowledgement, a new member of the family choosing to carry forward a tangible connection to Diana on one of the most significant nights of her life. It felt, in that moment, like continuity, like respect, perhaps even like a quiet integration of memory into the present. Yet as time progressed, the pattern became more pronounced. Butterfly earrings appeared, followed by a Cartier watch, then gold bracelets, each piece surfacing during carefully orchestrated public moments where cameras were guaranteed to capture every detail. While no one can definitively assign ulterior motives, and grief within families often finds expression through such personal items, the consistency invited sober reflection. When remembrance aligns repeatedly with high-visibility opportunities, even those of mature years who have seen decades of public life unfold begin to discern the difference between private tribute and something more strategic. The man residing at Althorp observed these developments with the quiet attentiveness of someone who understood the symbolic power these objects held, not merely as jewelry, but as extensions of his sister's enduring presence. In March of 2021, audiences worldwide viewed an interview conducted in soft, intimate surroundings with low golden lighting that created an atmosphere of confession and vulnerability. A royal wife spoke at length about her experiences of isolation, the institution's apparent indifference to her suffering, and the necessity of reaching beyond closed palace doors to address the public directly through a sympathetic interviewer. For those familiar with royal history, the structural and emotional parallels to Diana's 1995 Panorama interview were striking, almost uncanny. The framing of personal victimhood, the narrative of institutional deafness, the choice to go public when internal avenues seemed exhausted, all echoed with remarkable precision. The key distinction lay in context and timing. Diana had spoken from within the constraints of the system, bearing the full weight of potential consequences with no clear exit. The later interview emerged from a position already outside that system, supported by professional production resources and a broader media apparatus already in motion. Viewed from the childhood home where Diana had grown up, this resonance carried a different emotional charge, one that prompted deeper, more personal contemplation rather than straightforward recognition of homage. It raised questions about the architecture of such public disclosures and their lasting impact on those who carry the original memories. Few aspects of Charles Spencer's life carry the same depth of personal complexity as his indirect role in facilitating his sister Diana's 1995 Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. By established accounts, he made the initial connection that brought the journalist into contact with Diana at a time when she felt increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The formal inquiry years later, led with judicial thoroughness, revealed the calculated use of forged bank statements and entirely fabricated stories suggesting betrayal by those close to her. These deceptions were designed to deepen her fears and convince her that speaking publicly offered the only safe path forward. Having been deceived by the same materials himself, Spencer had unknowingly helped open the door to what became one of the most psychologically scarring public episodes of her life. The BBC's subsequent direct apology to him acknowledged the manipulative tactics that had been employed. For a brother who had long seen himself as protector and who had delivered that solemn vow in Westminster Abbey before 2 billion people to shield her sons, this later revelation demanded a profound and lasting personal reckoning. The years that followed manifested as quiet, determined atonement through the sealing of archives, repeated refusals of access requests, the deliberate choice of a private island burial at Althorp, and the careful safeguarding of home videos and personal writings. These actions speak to the mature response of a man confronting unintended consequences, seeking to prevent any similar exploitation of vulnerability even long after Diana's death. It is a regret that appears to have shaped decades of vigilant guardianship. When the documentary proposal landed on Charles Spencer's desk, it was presented with considerable ambition as a landmark commemorative project scheduled for 2027, marking 30 years since the Paris Tunnel tragedy. The vision centered on a sweeping cinematic exploration of Diana's life, positioned as definitive and fronted prominently by her son Prince Harry. To those not entrusted with the family's private holdings, the concept held strong emotional and historical pull, reportedly generating immediate enthusiasm at Netflix. Yet the scope of what it required went far beyond conventional archival material. It sought physical and narrative access to Althorp Estate, including the childhood home, extensive grounds, and the private island of Diana's burial. It requested entry to protected family archives, access to Diana's own handwritten diaries never intended for public eyes, and never released home movies capturing authentic, unguarded family moments. Without these primary elements, the project would amount to another familiar compilation of existing footage. With them, it promised unmatched authenticity and emotional depth. Critically, the proposed narrative arc reportedly sought to forge a clear, explicit continuum between Diana's conflicts with the royal establishment and Meghan Markle's contemporary experiences, framing the latter as a natural successor carrying forward the same spirit of defiance. For the man who had dedicated decades to protecting these intimate materials, such a comprehensive request represented a fundamental challenge to the boundaries he had long maintained. Charles Spencer delivered his response with characteristic understatement and finality. There were no press conferences called, no interviews granted, and no formal statements released to explain or justify the decision. He simply declined the documentary proposal and withheld any access to the protected family archives. After maintaining public silence for nearly 3 decades, this act of refusal emerged as the most articulate statement he had ever made on the matter. It represented a deliberate drawing of lines by the one family member whose moral authority over Diana's private memory stood largely beyond question, rooted in blood relation and decades of quiet stewardship. Those attuned to royal developments immediately grasped its significance. Where institutional decisions can easily be cast as self-serving protectionism by the establishment, this refusal carried the authenticity of independent familial duty unburdened by official roles or political calculations. In our modern era of relentless disclosure and commercial narrative building, such disciplined restraint resonates as a powerful counterpoint. For people of mature years who have witnessed countless cycles of media frenzy and public drama, it stands as a reminder that true authority frequently expresses itself most forcefully through through principled denial rather than elaborate explanation. As 2026 approached and unfolded, the Sussex media portfolio encountered mounting difficulties that painted a less optimistic picture than earlier projects had promised. The ambitious lifestyle series, intended to serve as a flagship for their post-royal brand, drew notably critical reviews across a range of outlets, including some traditionally more sympathetic to their perspective. Audience engagement metrics revealed challenges in building sustained interest beyond the initial surge of curiosity. While their earlier documentary exploring the circumstances of their departure from royal duties had achieved impressive viewership and cultural impact, subsequent endeavors struggled to replicate that level of resonance or commercial success. This evolving pattern suggested that public appetite remained strongest for content deeply connected to historical royal wounds and Diana's enduring legacy rather than newer lifestyle or personal branding initiatives. Such market signals likely contributed to the strategic decision to her memory still commands across generations. Items once belonging to her and repeated narrative references to her experiences surfaced in prominent public contexts without any apparent direct consultation with the individual holding primary responsibility for the original archive and its contents. As time progressed, these instances evolved steadily in both scope and ambition. They began as relatively personal symbolic gestures, but gradually expanded into more structured storytelling frameworks and ultimately formal requests for access to primary source materials themselves. Each such step effectively represented an engagement with assets and elements controlled by another party. The decisive refusal of the comprehensive proposal therefore functioned as a firm and necessary reminder of the critical importance of proper authorization when navigating legacies of such profound personal, emotional, and familial significance. Those who have accumulated years of experience observing the dynamics of public life and fame tend to recognize the subtle but important ethical considerations that arise when memory risks being approached primarily as an unrestricted commercial resource rather than a sacred and carefully stewarded inheritance deserving of respect and boundaries. Prince William has, by various accounts, maintained private reservations and discomfort regarding certain aspects of his mother's image being commercialized in the years following her passing. However, the nature and visibility of his position as the future king naturally impose significant limitations on how such concerns can be voiced or acted upon in any public capacity. Any overt intervention carries the potential to spark larger institutional narratives or accusations of undue family interference. Charles Spencer, by contrast, occupies a distinctly different and in many ways uniquely advantageous position. His direct sibling relationship with Diana, his own personal history intertwined with hers, and his complete independence from official royal duties or constitutional responsibilities grant him a freedom to act according to deeply held personal conviction and a sense of familial protective duty. This independence lends his decisions a particular clarity, authenticity, and moral authority that cannot be as easily dismissed or strategically reframed as mere institutional defensiveness. Within the broader, ongoing conversation about how Diana's complex legacy should best be honored and managed, this singular independent voice offers a perspective grounded firmly in intimate first-hand knowledge and lived experience rather than protocol, public relations considerations, or political calculations. The deeper and more fundamental fractures within the wider family have shown themselves to be remarkably persistent, with only not solely on past disagreements, but on the very real apprehension that any private family interactions or conversations could potentially become raw material for future public projects or content releases. This underlying dynamic has erected substantial and enduring barriers to genuine closeness and mutual understanding. As a result, the two brothers find themselves navigating distinctly separate life paths, each shaped by years of divergent personal experiences, choices, and external pressures. For those who have lived long enough to witness how intense public scrutiny and high-stakes environments can strain even the strongest of family bonds across decades, these divisions represent considerably more than temporary disagreements or passing conflicts. They embody the accumulated and lasting weight of circumstances, decisions made under duress, and their far-reaching human consequences. From the relatively secluded and peaceful setting of the Althorp estate in Northamptonshire, the overarching perspective has remained steadfastly oriented toward protection, preservation of dignity, and the careful maintenance of appropriate boundaries. The deliberate decision to lay Diana to rest on a private island Island, the ongoing safeguarding of sealed personal materials and writings, and the consistent enforcement of firm limits against repeated external requests together demonstrate a deep, sustained, and long-term commitment to shielding her memory from excessive commodification or inappropriate exploitation. These choices stem naturally from decades of direct personal experience with unimaginable loss, unrelenting media scrutiny, and a profound determination to honor his sister as a complete, multifaceted human being rather than reducing her solely to her public icon status. For individuals who have carried analogous responsibilities for protecting family history and cherished memories within their own lives over many years, such dedicated and quiet stewardship serves as a particularly compelling model of thoughtful, principled, and enduring resolve exercised without fanfare amid continuous external demands and pressures. The documentary proposal undoubtedly possessed a degree of understandable surface appeal. It was framed as an ambitious and potentially significant commemorative project capable of weaving together generational stories and offering fresh insights into Diana's life and influence. Nevertheless, when examined more closely, its extensive requirements concerning access to private holdings and the specific narrative direction it proposed ultimately proved incompatible with the core responsibilities and instincts of guardianship. The breadth of access sought to highly personal materials, combined with the proposed framing of legacy connections and continuations, raised serious and legitimate questions about how Diana's memory and story might be reshaped, reinterpreted, or repurposed to serve contemporary narrative needs. The rejection, handled without public drama or elaborate explanation, effectively succeeded in preserving the integrity of the protected materials against potential uses that could dilute, distort, or redirect their deeper personal and historical significance. This outcome underscores the often difficult yet essential judgment required when attempting to balance legitimate historical documentation with the equally compelling imperative to protect the more intimate and familial dimensions of legacy, a form of discernment that can only be fully refined through many years of careful thought and experience. Individuals fortunate enough to have followed the development and unfolding of these events across the span of several decades inevitably bring perspectives that have been tempered and deepened by accumulated life experience, reflection, and observation. Diana's remarkable life and story undeniably touched and continue to touch the hearts and minds of millions of people around the world. Yet its most intimate, personal, and vulnerable dimensions belong first and foremost to those who knew her directly in the roles of sister, mother, daughter, and close family member. Discovering and maintaining the proper, respectful equilibrium between legitimate and widespread public interest on one hand and the equally vital need for private preservation and protection on the other requires a nuanced and often subtle form of discernment. This discernment looks well beyond the immediate allure of commercial opportunities or compelling narrative hooks. Approaches that consciously prioritize thoughtful reflection, appropriate restraint, and respect for boundaries frequently serve the long-term dignity and authenticity of memory more effectively and honorably than strategies centered on constant exposure and reinterpretation. Mature consideration in these matters appreciates that a complete understanding of legacy must encompass both its broad cultural impact and the necessary, often sacred right to maintain certain protected spaces against the forces of endless public consumption and commercial can truly replicate or fully share. These encompass her hands-on guidance and presence during visits to hospitals and charitable shelters, her dedicated efforts to instill lasting values of compassion, service, and social awareness, and the shattering, sudden loss he endured at a tender age while the entire world watched with intense scrutiny. This shared experience, long reflection, and a sense of collective familial duty. Situations of this emotional and relational complexity rarely lend themselves to straightforward, simple, or universally satisfying resolutions. As Diana's elder son and the designated heir to the throne, Prince William bears the particularly heavy and compounded burden of navigating personal familial grief and loss while simultaneously shouldering the extensive responsibilities associated with his prospective constitutional role. Private concerns and discomfort regarding the handling and commercialization of his mother's memory must constantly be weighed and balanced against larger obligations concerning institutional stability, public perception, national expectations, and future duties. Any form of direct or overt public engagement with these highly sensitive issues carries the inherent risk of transforming what are essentially private family matters into much wider controversies with potentially far-reaching implications. This demanding position frequently necessitates careful restraint, strategic navigation, and difficult choices in which personal sentiments and desires may, at least in the public sphere, need to be subordinated to broader considerations of duty and continuity. Those who have either observed closely or personally experienced the immense pressures of inherited public roles and responsibilities over many years possess a clearer understanding of the particular personal, emotional, and psychological costs that such duties can impose across the course of a lifetime. Operating in the background, beyond the central individuals most directly involved, exists a larger, highly sophisticated, and well-entrenched machinery dedicated to the ongoing process of converting personal tragedies, complex family histories, raw emotional experiences, and powerful cultural memories into sustained, marketable commercial content. Private writings, reflections, and intimate family moments risk being systematically transformed into potential source material for episodes, segments, documentaries, or streaming series. This powerful apparatus exerts persistent, often intense, and sometimes subtle pressure on even the most sensitive, sacred, and personal aspects of individual and familial legacy. Individuals who have had the benefit of decades spent observing the evolutive instincts and responsibilities of other guardians can the deliberate, thoughtful preservation of mystery, privacy, and certain untouched elements of a loved one's life actually constitute a more profound, respectful, and lasting form of honoring the departed than repeated cycles of public reinterpretation, exposure, and commercial utilization? Where precisely should the often blurred line be drawn between legitimate, heartfelt life and the inexorable passage of time? Mature reflection in this realm involves the patient and respectful holding of multiple valid viewpoints rather than the insistent pursuit of immediate, simplistic, or one-sided consensus. The clear, unequivocal, and principled refusal that originated from Althorp stands as a significant and meaningful assertion within this ongoing saga. It demonstrates convincingly that carefully considered boundaries rooted in conviction can indeed be maintained with dignity, even when confronted with substantial external interest, pressure, and potential commercial incentives. As the larger story surrounding these deeply personal family matters continues to evolve and unfold in the years to come, those who choose to observe with the benefit of experienced, measured, and compassionate eyes may find real value in approaching it with balanced consideration for the complex and often painful human realities faced by every individual involved. Diana's remarkable legacy continues to endure powerfully not only through repeated public retellings, commemorations, and cultural references, but also, and perhaps even more meaningfully, through the more private truths, memories, and essences that have been carefully and lovingly protected by those who knew her most intimately. In the final analysis, the path forward may well depend upon cultivating a greater collective appreciation for the inherent power, wisdom, and necessity of certain forms of silence, restraint, and deliberate privacy. These qualities possess the capacity to create essential breathing space for genuine reflection, healing, and remembrance amid the relentless demands, noise, speed, and commercial pressures that characterize so much of our contemporary memory culture.